Hey, I'm Jusko from ProudMoney.com, and in this video we are going to talk about how often you can safely apply for a credit card. This is a topic we have discussed in the past, but it's been a couple years. In this video I'm going to talk about maybe some changes in my thinking, but also some responses of my own to some of the comments I got from the earlier video where people kind of pushed back on me. But before I do any of that, I'm going to ask you to please subscribe to this YouTube channel if you have not already, and if you have already, I thank you for doing so. So we're going to talk about how often you can safely apply for a credit card if you want to make sure that you don't ruin your credit score. And then sort of as a different wrinkle also is how often can you apply for a credit card if you don't want to ruin your chances of getting the credit cards you want in the future. And as we talk about this topic, there are sort of two sub-questions that go along with it. Number one is, how long is your credit history? Number two is that credit history good, bad, or somewhere in the middle? Let's talk first about people that have no credit history going after their first credit card. When you have been approved for that first credit card, you have that card in your hands, my feeling is that you should use that card for a full year before you go after your second credit card. Use that card, make those payments on time, build a little credit history before you go after your second credit card. Two exceptions to this thinking. Number one is going to be if you got that first card and the credit line is so small that you feel like you can't really use that card, well then maybe it makes sense to go to a new card issuer and see if you can get a little bit bigger of a credit line. And then the second exception would be if you want to add secured cards on top of that unsecured card that you got as your first credit card. So a regular unsecured card means that you have been extended credit. You didn't have to put up any money or do anything to get that card. Also, there are secured cards where you put down a security deposit. Those secured cards really don't have any risk for the bank. So if you want to get some secured cards and that will help you build your credit faster, there's no reason not to. But that doesn't really play into the thinking here in terms of how often you should get a credit card. Now, last time I made a video on this same topic, I had the same advice. Wait for a year before you go after your second credit card after getting that first credit card. And some people in the comments said to me, "You are by far our favorite YouTuber, but you are wrong here. You are being too conservative. As far as they are concerned, you should get 2, 3, maybe 4 credit cards in the early going and not really worry so much about the hits to your credit score or anything like that, because you then would establish a credit history with multiple cards in the short term, and then over the 2, 3 years after that, that means that you would have sort of an average age of your accounts that is a little older, where if you wait and don't get your second card until after a full year has gone by, well then you are sort of stretching out the period where you are establishing this credit history. So I get the thinking there, but I guess my pushback to that would be that if you get too many cards up front, the thing that can happen is you now have established a credit history with multiple cards, but oftentimes they aren't going to have a very big credit line, any of them. However, between the 3 or 4 of them that you might have, you might end up with a decent credit line if that was just one card. So what ends up happening to some people is they get these multiple cards, and then when they want a credit line increase on one of those cards, because maybe they feel like the credit lines they have aren't quite big enough for the purchases they want to make, they can't always get those credit line increases because the credit card company looks at their overall credit picture and says, well, you got $4,000 in available credit among all these credit cards that you have. We're not going to give you any more because that seems about right for the amount of credit history you have and the number of new cards that you have opened over this particular period of time. And so it can be difficult to sort of get yourself out of that hole. If you start with too many cards at once that all have small credit lines, you might be stuck there for a while. So that's my rationale. Get that first credit card, do all the things right with it for a year before you go after that second card, and you might be surprised to find out that you get a much more substantial credit line from that second credit card than you would have if you had gotten that second card too close to the time that you opened the first card. And overall, I think it's probably a wash in terms of what it does for your credit score, whether you get one card at the beginning and then get the second card after a year, if you get that higher credit line, than it would be if you got 3 or 4 cards in very quick succession at the beginning of your credit history. Oh, and by the way, same thing if you have a bad credit history. If you have a low credit score, you're under 600, you might want to just pretend you're starting over. Get yourself one card that you are going to hold for a year and do everything right before you go after any more. If you do have the bad credit history, maybe this is a place where you add 1 or 2 secured cards on top of that one unsecured card as you're trying to rebuild your credit history. But overall, same thinking. All right, so what about after that first year? Well, my feeling is that once you have a full year of credit history under your belt, those next 4 years after that are still when you are fairly new to credit in the bank's minds, and so I would say you shouldn't go after a credit card more than once every 6 months. Now, if this seems to you that this is maybe too conservative and that you want to go after credit cards more often than that, I would say this to you. At the end of 5 years, using the formula that I just used, which means 1 credit card in the first year, 2 credit cards every year after that, at the end of 5 years, you would have 9 credit cards. I think for most people with 5 years of credit history, you don't really need to have gotten more than 9 credit cards in those first 5 years. So I think that every 6 months standard is a good one to keep in your head when you are thinking about how often you should add a credit card. And remember that we are looking at this not only from a credit score frame, but also from the frame of what are the credit card companies going to think about me in the future when I want to get more and better credit cards from them when the opportunities arise. Because one of the things that definitely has happened over the last 5 years in particular is that the credit card companies have clamped down on people that get too many credit cards. So there are some rules that we sort of know of as almost being set in stone. Chase's 524 rule that says if you have 5 credit cards in the last 2 years, they're not going to give you a new one. And there are other standards that some of the issuers use as well. So if you go kind of hog wild early in your credit career, so to speak, well then you could be at a place where no one's going to give you credit because it looks like all you do is go after more and more credit. You're only chasing bonuses. You're not really using the cards that they are giving you. So you want to be somewhat conservative to think to yourself, I'm going to use some of these cards. I'm going to show that, you know, I'm a customer that they might want in the future so that you are not shut out down the line. You may have noticed on YouTube and other social media that there are a lot of creators that act like they're very high rollers and they want you to be a high roller, and the way to be a high roller is to do what they want you to do, which generally is to do something that is going to make them money. So they tell you you can get 50 credit cards and get 5 million miles or 5 million points and jet all over the country for free, but usually what they are really doing is they are being a high roller by renting an hour on a private jet that is sitting in an airport somewhere that never actually leaves the ground. And so there's sort of a fantasy thing often on the internet that can make you feel like you can go faster and faster and get all this stuff immediately, but in reality, you usually have to have a little bit of patience. So after those first 5 years of credit history, I think that 6-month rule is still a good one to try to keep in your head, but I think you can also be a lot more flexible with it. For myself, I still use that 6-month rule as sort of a general rule, but I also sort of have this 3-month rule, which is I want sort of 3 months in between, but if I see some cards I want and they happen to, you know, show up with some really great offers in a very short time span, I don't have any problem going after 2 cards in a month or 3 cards in 3 months or something like that. But I always sort of think to myself, if I'm going to bunch up here, I'm going to have a period afterwards where I'm not going to go after anything new for a while. So if I get 3 cards in 3 months, it might be another 6 to 9 months before I would go after another card. So you can be more flexible with it. You're not going to have to worry about your credit score as much once your credit is established, assuming that you have been paying your bills on time. And so you can kind of do what you want. And as long as you're using your credit cards, the credit card companies are kind of going to let those things go because they see that you have been a decent customer in the past. So there's no hard and fast rules here. You sort of have to do what is right for you and what you see works with your own credit history and your income, which comes into play, which I'll talk about in a second. So think about how much history you have, and if you have been using the cards that you have, how you feel like your relationship with any particular credit card company is going, and go from there. This is really more of a rule of thumb to say early on in your credit career, when you first get your first credit card, you're going to want to wait a while. That little period after that first year, you're still going to want to be somewhat conservative. After 5 years or so, you can pretty much do what you want, assuming that you have done everything right in those first 5 years. One last point, if you have a lot of money, some of these rules go out the window. If you're making over $100,000 a year, the banks are going to be more lenient. If you're making over $200,000 per year, they're going to be way more lenient, especially if you are using one of their cards already and putting a lot of charges on it. So if you're making $200,000 a year and you're putting $30,000 of charges onto, one or two American Express cards, well, American Express will be more than happy to give you more cards, even if it does not fit some sort of predetermined rule that they might have. However, if you're not even making $30,000 per year, well then obviously they're going to clamp down a little harder on you, and they're not going to, look at you as favorably when they think about giving you new credit cards or increasing the credit lines that you have. So that's the unfortunate truth, is that the rich get treated differently than people that are of more modest means, and that is true in the credit card world as well. So that's my advice. I'd love to hear your pushback or your questions or comments in that comments section below. Otherwise, I thank you for watching, and as always, please go to proudmoney.com, where we do credit card reviews, we talk personal finance, we talk deals, and all sorts of other fun stuff too. Thank you for watching. Bye.